Hi, have you already heard about the latest Steinberg article that the latest Intel processors are not recommended for running Cubase or Nuendo? Or maybe you've had bad experience running the latest Intel processors with Cubase and Nuendo yourself? Let's find out what that's all about. Let's go. Now, mid-2021, I made a whole series of videos on how I built my own DAW PC for running Cubase. And if you're interested in those videos, I will put a link to the playlist at the end of this one. But at the time, I chose an Intel processor of the 10th generation, even though the 11th generation was just out. And the reason for that I stated in the first video as well. But recently I saw a Gearspace thread that referred to a Steinberg article that there might be a problem with running Cubase and Nuendo on the latest 12th or 13th generation of Intel processors. I'll put a link to the article in the description, but let's also have a look. It's an article on the Steinberg support site, and it literally mentions performance issues on Intel Core 12th Gen or newer hybrid architecture CPUs. Now, the current problem has to do with the fact that running Cubase and Nuendo on systems with hybrid architecture CPUs, utilizing performance efficiency cores, P cores and E cores, such as a 12th generation Intel Core Alder Lake or newer, can lead to audio dropouts and reduced performance. And then a very, direct statement. This is why we currently cannot recommend using these processors. Now, what they're talking about is that the latest generation of Intel processors currently have a hybrid architecture for their cores. Now, I think we've probably all heard of processor cores, where processors have like 8, 10, 20, maybe even more cores. And this basically allows them to run multiple tasks at the same time in parallel. Now, previously these cores of the processor all had the same performance, but since the Intel 12th generation, they have so-called P performance cores and E efficiency cores, where the performance cores are meant to do the real heavy lifting and run more time-critical tasks, and the efficiency cores can do the more background tasks which are less time-critical. And apparently that's where the current problem lies, because the tasks that Cubase wants to do in parallel are not all scheduled to the right cores. Let's have a look. So what they're stating here is that Windows 11 is recommended for CPUs with a hybrid architecture to make proper use of those E cores and P cores. And the included thread director, which is actually a microcontroller on the CPU itself, assigns tasks to available cores to use as many cores as possible simultaneously. However, tests have shown that tasks which are not in focus and run in the background, such as rendering jobs, minimized windows, or real-time audio tasks, could end up on the much slower E cores. And apparently, this can lead to audio dropouts and reduced performance, which is obviously not what you want when you're running Cubase or Nuendo. Now, Steinberg did also mention two workarounds, because workaround 1 is to disable the E cores in the BIOS. So this basically means that you're shutting down the E cores on your processor and only run using the P cores, so that none of the Cubase tasks ever get scheduled to the E cores, which avoids the problem, but you're also not using your processor fully anymore. So they say this way no task can be moved to the E cores anymore. However, this is a system-wide setting which is not always desirable, because obviously other applications might work perfectly fine using P cores and E cores, and you may want to use E cores for some applications so that they don't take up P cores, which you need for Cubase. Now, another possibility is to set the processor affinity for the application, which basically means that you can force Cubase to run only on P cores, offering the best performance. Now, you can do this via the Task Manager in Windows. You can go to Details, find your Cubase process, and then you can set the affinity, which basically means that you can tell Cubase which CPU cores to use. Well, you have to know how many P cores your processor has, and then you can disable the E cores, which are always last in the list. That's what is explained over here. Now, the drawback of this workaround is that this has to be done every time the application is used, because obviously you're doing this from the Task Manager, and you need to start up Cubase to see Cubase in the Task Manager, and it's only remembered for that one run of Cubase. And if you restart Cubase, you have to do the same procedure again. Now, they do mention that there is a shortcut to make sure that the processor affinity gets set on every run, and that's this article. And what it comes down to is that you basically create a shortcut with a special target, and with the processor affinity in that target over here, you can set exactly which CPU cores are meant to be used by this application. And you can check that again in the Task Manager. But in this way, you have a special shortcut in which you can start up Cubase with just P cores. So E cores will not be used, and you will not have dropouts or performance issues. Now, somebody also translated to how to specifically do this for Cubase in the forum post. And I will link this post in the description of the video as well. Now before I go on, if you like this video or find it useful, please give it a thumbs up for the YouTube algorithm, subscribe to the channel, and you can ring the little bell icon if you want to know when I publish another video. For more support, you can use the super thanks button or any of the affiliate links in the description if you want to buy anything at those stores. I will get a small percentage without any extra cost to you. But let's get back to the video. Well, both of those solutions are, well, really workarounds. They're not really solutions. You don't want to limit your application or even your whole PC to just using P-cores. But a more structural solution may not be so easy. If we have a look at this Microsoft employee here in the Gearspace forum. Now, I will not go over his whole post because it's quite technical, but what it basically comes down to is that he says that there is a way on the Microsoft operating system to program your application to specify for every task that you want your application to do. In this case, Cubase is the application. Cubase could specify for each task whether it is a time-critical task or a not-so-time-critical task. And then the operating system, Windows in this case, together with the thread director, could use that information to schedule the tasks on either a P-core or an E-core. Now, of course, I don't know where the problem is currently, whether Cubase actually does not do this correctly, tell Windows which threads are time critical and which are not, or maybe there's just a bug in Windows or the thread director on the CPU to assign those tasks properly to the right cores. Cubase is not an open source application, so we cannot actually look at the code to see what's happening, and neither is the Windows operating system, of course, or the Intel microcontroller code. But the proper structural solution for this issue, so that you can just fully use your 12th or 13th generation Intel processors with Cubase without thinking about it, is possibly in one or multiple of those layers of software. So we can really only keep fingers crossed to get a structural solution for this soon. Now, knowing this, what would I do if I were building a new PC now? Well, I think I consider myself quite technical savvy. I have a background in software engineering, so I would probably still go for an Intel processor, and maybe if I really ran into these problems, I would probably temporarily use one of the solutions, probably the one with the shortcut, starting up just Cubase to use P-cores only. But obviously I would not prefer to do that for a long time. But if you don't want all that hassle to deal with and still want to run Cubase, then of course you have the option of selecting a different processor brand, for example AMD, if you still want to run Windows. Or you could even go to Mac, maybe running one of those nice, very efficient M2 chips that do not seem to have these problems with Cubase. Now I have to say that I'm also very curious whether any of you guys actually ran into this issue or are having problems if you're using the 12th or 13th generation Intel processor with Cubase. Please let me know in the comments if you have noticed any issues, and if so, whether you maybe are using one of the workarounds and whether that worked for you. Now, as already mentioned in the beginning, I made a whole series of videos on how I built my latest DAW PC for Cubase. And even though the hardware selection part of that is probably kind of outdated by now, the series was also very much about how to assemble any hardware that you get for a DAW PC and how to subsequently install software and Cubase and even migrate Cubase from your old PC to your new PC without losing all the settings and configurations. And all of that is still very actual, so I would say have a look, enjoy, and see you soon.